The Velen Emperor refused to surrender. He stood in his war room, surrounded by his generals, and gave the order to fight. Every ship, every station, every weapon the Empire had would be turned toward the humans. He believed that his people were warriors. He believed that the defenses around his throne world were the strongest in the galaxy. He believed that the humans, who had never fought a real war in space, would break when they tasted true Velen resistance. He was wrong about all of it. The Battle of the Velen Throne World began at dawn, local time. The planet's orbital defense ring was a massive structure that circled the entire world, bristling with thousands of weapons platforms, shield generators, and fighter bays. Behind it, a fleet of 80,000 Velen warships formed a wall between the planet and the approaching human forces. It was the largest Velen military gathering in centuries. Every ship they could pull from every corner of their empire had been called home. Yuna's vanguard arrived first. Her 50,000 ships dropped out of folded space in perfect formation, appearing so close to the Velen defense line that the enemy sensors barely had time to register them before the first shots were fired. The battle was fast and brutal. The Velen ships fought hard. Their weapons were powerful and their pilots were experienced. But the human ships were faster, and their tactics were something the Velens had never seen before. Yuna had studied every recorded Velen battle in history. She knew how they formed their lines. She knew how they moved their reserves. She knew where they were strong and where they were weak, and she used all of it against them. Her vanguard did not attack the Velen line head-on. Instead, they split into dozens of smaller groups that hit the line at different points at the same time. Every time the Velens moved ships to strengthen one part of their defense, Yuna's groups would pull back and strike somewhere else. The Velen commanders were chasing shadows, moving their forces back and forth, while the human ships picked them apart, piece by piece. 40 minutes. That was how long it took for Yuna's vanguard to break through the Velen defense line. When the gap opened, she pushed her fastest ships through it and headed straight for the orbital defense ring. The ring's weapons were powerful, but they were designed to fight large, slow fleets that attacked from one direction. Yuna's ships came from everywhere. They flew under the ring, over it, and through the gaps in its structure. They targeted the shield generators first, then the weapons platforms, then the communication arrays. One by one, the sections of the ring went dark. Behind the vanguard, the main fleet arrived. 500,000 ships filled the space around the Velen throne world, like a sea of metal and light. The sight of it on the Velen sensors was something their operators would never forget. Every screen, every display, every scanner showed the same thing. Ships, everywhere. More ships than they had ever seen in one place. The remaining Velen fleet fought on, but the outcome was no longer in question. Sujin directed the main fleet with the calm precision of a surgeon. She assigned groups to surround the remaining Velen ships and gave them one chance to stand down before engaging. Some Velen captains surrendered. Many did not. Those who fought were defeated quickly. Sujin did not enjoy it. She did not celebrate. She simply moved to the next target and repeated the process. On the bridge of the Tabak, Yuna watched the orbital ring collapse. Large sections of it broke apart and drifted into space, glowing with the heat of battle. Behind the ring, the throne world turned slowly, its cities visible as clusters of light on the dark surface. Yuna looked at those lights and thought about New Busan. She thought about the lights that had gone out there, the homes, the streets, the lives. She did not give the order to fire on the planet. She never would. Doyun was there. Admiral Sujin had brought him from Maro 4 to the flagship Hala. He was not in command of anything. He held no rank that mattered in this battle. But Sujin had wanted him to be there. She wanted him to see it. He stood at the observation window of the Hala and looked down at the Velen throne world. His hands were still scarred from the fire on New Busan. His eyes were tired and sad. He had not smiled since the day of the attack. But as he watched the Velen defense ring fall apart and the Velen fleet surrender ship by ship, something in his chest loosened. Not joy, not satisfaction, just the smallest feeling that the people he had lost had not been forgotten. Sujin stood beside him. She did not speak. She just stood there, looking out the same window. After 3 hours, the battle was over. The Velen military was broken. Their fleet was either destroyed or captured. Their orbital defenses were gone. Their throne world was surrounded on every side by human ships. There was nowhere to run, and no one coming to help. The Emperor sent his surrender from the throne room. It was not a proud message. It was not dignified. It was the voice of a man who had finally understood that he had made the worst mistake of his life. He agreed to every condition Sujin had listed. Full surrender of military command, arrest and trial of every officer involved in the attack on New Busan, open borders, a public admission broadcast to every species in the galaxy. Sujin accepted the surrender, and then did something that surprised everyone. She sent a fleet of medical ships to the Velen throne world. Not warships, medical ships, filled with doctors, medicine, and supplies. Because the battle had damaged parts of the planet's infrastructure, and there were Velen civilians who needed help. When Korath, the Velen general, saw the medical ships arriving, he did not understand. He contacted the Hala and asked why the humans were helping them. Sujin answered him directly. Because we are not you. We came here to stop your military, not to hurt your people. Your civilians did not burn our colony. Your emperor did. Your generals did. And they will answer for it. But the rest of your people are not our enemies. Korath was silent for a long time. Then he said something that no Velen general had ever said to another species before. Thank you. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy watched everything that happened. Every species, every empire, every council member saw the footage. They saw the burned ruins of New Busan. They saw the 500,000 ships. They saw the battle of the throne world. And they saw the human medical ships landing on Velen soil to help the same people they had just defeated. The message was clear, and it spread to every corner of the galaxy faster than any fleet could travel. Humanity was not a species to be ignored. They were not a species to be pushed around. They would build their homes in peace, and they would trade and talk and cooperate with anyone willing to do the same. But if someone burned their people, if someone touched their children, if someone thought they could strike without consequence, then they would come, all of them, and they would not stop until the matter was finished. Do-hyun returned to Maro 4 after the war. The valley was still black. The ruins were still there. But crews had already begun clearing the land and laying new foundations. Thousands of people had volunteered to help rebuild New Busan. Ships arrived every day carrying materials, food, and workers from Earth and from colonies across human space. Do-hyun walked through the place where the hospital had stood. The hole in the ground had been filled in. Someone had planted a small tree there. It was thin and young, barely taller than his knee, but it was green and it was alive. He knelt beside it and put his hand on the soil. He stayed there for a long time, not speaking, not moving, just feeling the warmth of the ground beneath his fingers. Then he stood up, looked at the orange sky above him, and walked toward the new construction site where the workers were waiting. The Velen Emperor sat on a throne made of dark stone, in the center of a room that was older than most civilizations. His name was not important to humans. They simply called him the Emperor. He was tall, thin, and covered in pale gray skin that looked like polished rock. His eyes were black and deep, and when he spoke, his voice echoed like something coming from the bottom of a well. He had not thought about New Busan since the attack. To him, it had been a small task, a minor correction. The humans had been told to leave that system, and they had refused. So he had sent a fleet to remove them. It was the same thing his empire had done 1,000 times before to 1,000 different species. Burn a colony, send a message, and wait for the weaker race to fall in line. The humans would complain, he thought. They would go to the Galactic Council and file reports. They would hold speeches and demand justice, and nothing would happen, because the Galactic Council was slow and weak, and the Velen Empire was strong. That was how things worked. That was how they had always worked. He was wrong. The first report came from a border station on the outer edge of Velen space. A young officer named Nothing the Emperor would remember sent a short message to the capital. Unknown fleet detected. Ship's count exceeds 40,000. Origin unknown. They appeared without warning. The Emperor's military advisor, a decorated general named Korath, brought the report to him. The Emperor barely looked at it. Pirates, perhaps, or a lost convoy from one of the lesser empires. Send a patrol to investigate. Korath sent the patrol. 20 warships moved toward the border to meet the unknown fleet. They never reported back. The second report came 12 minutes later. This time it was not from a border station. It was from the station behind it, and the station behind that. All of them sent the same message before going silent. Human ships. They are everywhere. The Emperor sat up on his throne for the first time in hours. Eunice Vanguard had entered Velen space like a knife through water. The Palefire engines brought them across the border before a single alarm could be raised. By the time the Velens realized what was happening, the first 5 border stations had already been disabled. Not destroyed, disabled. Eunice's orders were precise. Take out weapon systems and communication arrays, but leave the stations intact. Leave the people alive. The Velen officers on those stations watched through their windows as human ships passed by in numbers they could not count. They tried to send warnings, but their communication systems were dead. All they could do was watch. Back on the Tabak, Eunice studied the map of Velen space as her fleet pushed deeper. Every system they entered, they followed the same pattern. Disable military targets. Cut communication lines. Move on. They did not stop. They did not slow down. They moved through Velen territory like a wave that could not be held back. The Velens tried to respond. They sent fleets from their inner systems to meet the human vanguard. The first Velen response fleet was made up of 8,000 ships. It was a strong force by galactic standards. They formed a defensive line across a narrow corridor between 2 star systems and waited for the humans to come. Yuna did not go through the corridor. She went around it. The Palefire engines allowed her ships to fold space and appear behind a Velen formation in seconds. Before the Velen commanders could turn their ships around, the human vanguard had already passed them and was moving toward the next system. The Velen admiral in charge of that fleet sent a furious message to the Emperor. They are too fast. We cannot catch them. We cannot predict where they will appear. Their technology is beyond anything in our records. The Emperor was no longer calm. He stood in his war room, surrounded by advisors and generals, watching the map of his empire light up with red dots. Each dot was a human fleet. Each flash was a Velen military station going dark. In less than 6 hours, the humans had penetrated deeper into Velen space than any enemy had in 500 years. How many ships do they have? The Emperor demanded. Korath looked at the data with an expression the Emperor had never seen on his face before. Fear. The Vanguard alone is 50,000 ships, Emperor. But our deep sensors are detecting a second wave behind them. Much larger. How large? Korath swallowed. 500,000. The room went silent. 500,000 warships. The Velen Empire's entire military, spread across hundreds of systems, totaled around 300,000 ships. The humans had brought almost twice that number, and they had done it in days. Nobody in the galaxy had known the humans had this kind of force. Nobody had even suspected. The Emperor sat down slowly. For the first time in his long life, he did not know what to do. On the Tabak, Yuna received a message from Admiral Sujin. The main fleet had entered Velen space and was following the path the Vanguard had cleared. Sujin's voice was steady and professional. "Good work, Commander. Continue pushing toward the throne world. We will handle the systems behind you." Yuna acknowledged the order and looked at her map. The Velen throne world was now only 3 systems away. She could almost see it. Then a new signal appeared on her screen. It was coming from the Velen capital, a direct communication request aimed at the human fleet. Yuna looked at her communications officer, a woman named Jiwon, who raised her eyebrows. "They want to talk," Jiwon said. Yuna thought about it for a moment. Then she shook her head. "Forward it to Admiral Sujin. This is above my rank." The message was sent to Sujin, who was aboard her own flagship, the Hala, at the center of the main fleet. She read the Velen request and then opened a direct channel to the Velen throne world. She did not wait for the Emperor to speak first. "This is Admiral Sujin of the United Earth Fleet. I am speaking to whoever is in charge of the Velen Empire. You are receiving this message because 12 days ago your forces attacked and destroyed a human colony on Maro 4. Over 2 million civilians were killed. You did this without warning, without cause, and without mercy." She paused. The entire fleet could hear her. Every ship, every crew member, every soldier standing at their station listened to her voice through the speakers. "You burned our people. You killed our children, and you thought we would do nothing. You thought we were weak. You thought we were small. You were wrong." Another pause. Longer this time. "I am now entering your space with 500,000 warships. Every system between your border and your capital is already under our control. Your military cannot stop us. Your allies will not help you. You are alone." She looked at the screen in front of her, where the image of the Velen throne world rotated slowly. A planet of dark mountains and deep oceans, surrounded by orbital stations and defense platforms. "You have one chance to end this without more blood. Surrender your military command. Hand over every officer responsible for the attack on New Busan. Open your borders to human inspectors, and agree to a full and public admission of what you did." She leaned forward slightly. "If you refuse, we will come to your door and we will open it ourselves. You touched our home. Now we are at yours. The choice is yours, but I suggest you make it quickly. Sujin, out." She closed the channel and leaned back in her chair. Byung-ho, standing beside her, looked at her with wide eyes. "Do you think they will surrender?" he asked. Sujin looked at the map, where the Velen throne world sat surrounded by the red dots of her fleet, closing in from every direction. "No," she said quietly, "I do not think they will." Across 12 shipyards scattered through human space, the lights came on all at once. It was like watching a sleeping giant open its eyes. For decades, humanity had been quietly building, not because they wanted war, not because they planned to conquer, but because they had learned a long time ago, back when they were still fighting each other on their own small blue planet, that peace only lasts when you have the strength to protect it. The shipyards were enormous. The largest one, called Forge Station, orbited high above Mars. It was so big that it could be seen from the surface with the naked eye, a ring of metal and light that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. Inside it, ships sat in rows like sleeping animals. Destroyers, cruisers, carriers, battleships, and the flagships, massive vessels that carried enough firepower to crack a moon in half. All of them had been maintained. All of them had been waiting. Commander Yuna arrived at Forge Station on the second day after the order was given. She was 38 years old, tall and thin, with short hair and a face that rarely smiled. She had graduated at the top of her class from the Earth Naval Academy. and had spent the last 15 years training for a war that most people said would never come. Now it had come, and she was ready. Her assignment was to lead the vanguard, the first wave of ships that would enter Velan space ahead of the main fleet. It was the most dangerous position. The vanguard would face the enemy first, absorb the first attacks, and create openings for the ships behind them. Yuna had volunteered for it without hesitation. She walked through the corridors of Forge Station and watched the crews working. Thousands of men and women moved with purpose, loading weapons, running system checks, and fueling engines. Nobody was talking about sports, or food, or weekend plans. The mood was heavy but focused. Everyone knew why they were here. In the engine bay of the flagship Tabak, Yuna found the man she was looking for. Engineer Jiwan was on his back under a massive machine, his arms buried in wires and metal. He was covered in grease and had not slept in at least 30 hours. Jiwan was not a soldier. He was a scientist, a quiet man who preferred math problems over people. But he had designed something that could change everything. "How is it?" Yuna asked, standing over him. Jiwan slid out from under the machine and looked up at her with tired eyes. "Almost ready. I need 6 more hours. You have 4. He nodded and slid back under. The machine Jiwan was working on was called the Pale Fire Engine. It was a propulsion system that humanity had developed in secret over the last 20 years. Most species in the galaxy use standard faster-than-light drives that allowed them to travel between stars in days or weeks. The Pale Fire Engine was different. It folded space in a way that no other species had figured out. With it, a ship could cross 100 light-years in less than a day. The technology had never been used in combat. It had barely been tested outside of controlled environments. But Sujin had given the order to install it on every ship in the fleet. It was a gamble. If it worked, the human fleet would arrive in Velan space before anyone even knew they had left. If it failed, ships could be lost in the folds of space, torn apart by forces they could not control. Jiwan had spent years trying to make it safe. He was confident in the math. But math and reality were sometimes different things. While Jiwan worked on the engines, Yuna held a meeting with her commanding officers on the bridge of the Tabak. There were 12 of them, each responsible for a section of the vanguard fleet. She stood at the center of the room with a holographic map of Velan space floating in front of her. "The main fleet will consist of 500,000 ships," she said. The number hung in the air. Even for the officers in the room, it was hard to understand. 500,000. It was the largest military force humanity had ever assembled. It was possibly the largest military force the galaxy had ever seen. "Our vanguard will be 50,000 ships. We go in first. We hit their border defenses and open a path. The main fleet follows 6 hours behind us." She pointed to a cluster of stars on the map. "The Velan throne world is here, in the center of their territory. That is our final target. But we do not rush there. We move system by system, cutting off their supply lines, disabling their communication networks, and neutralizing their military stations. We do this clean. We do this right." "Commander, what are our rules regarding civilian targets?" Yuna looked at him directly. "We do not touch them. Not one civilian, not one home, not one school. We are not the Velans. We fight their military, and we leave their people alone. Anyone under my command who harms a civilian will answer to me personally. Is that understood?" Every officer in the room nodded. Back on Earth, Admiral Sujin was managing the larger picture. The logistics of moving 500,000 ships were staggering. Each ship needed fuel, ammunition, food, water, medical supplies, and crew. Some of the larger warships carried over 10,000 people. The total number of humans involved in the operation was close to 50 million. It was not just a fleet. It was a moving civilization. Sujin worked around the clock. She coordinated with shipyard commanders, supply officers, intelligence teams. She made sure every colony was defended while the main fleet was away. She planned escape routes in case things went wrong. She prepared for every outcome, good and bad. But in the quiet moments, when her office was empty and the screens were dark, she thought about New Busan. She had visited the colony once, years ago, for an inspection. She remembered the orange sky. She remembered the children running through the fields. She remembered a woman at the hospital who had offered her tea and talked about how happy she was to live in such a peaceful place. That woman was probably dead now. Sujin pushed the thought away and went back to work. On the third day, Jihan finished the Pale Fire installations. He ran the final tests himself, checking every number 3 times. When he was satisfied, he sent a message to Yuna with 2 words: "Engines ready." Yuna forwarded the message to Sujin. Sujin forwarded it to President Taeho. Within the hour, the order was given. All across human space, the ships began to move. They pulled out of their docks, slowly at first, like great metal whales leaving their caves. Then they formed into groups, then into formations, and then into fleets. The sight of them from the surface of Mars was something people would never forget. The sky was filled with ships, so many that they blocked out the sun for a full 20 minutes as they passed overhead. People stood in the streets and watched. Some cheered, some cried, some just stood in silence with their hands over their hearts. Yuna stood on the bridge of the Taebaek and watched the formation come together on her display. 50,000 ships in perfect rows, their engines glowing blue against the black of space. Behind them, still assembling, the rest of the fleet stretched back as far as her sensors could reach. She took a deep breath and opened a channel to every ship in the vanguard. Her voice was steady and clear. "You all know why we are here. You all saw what happened to New Busan. Today, we are not fighting for territory. We are not fighting for resources. We are fighting because someone hurt our people, and we will not let that stand. Stay sharp, follow your orders, and come home alive." She closed the channel and turned to her navigation officer. "Activate the Pale Fire engines." A low hum filled the ship, building slowly until the walls themselves seemed to vibrate. On every ship in the fleet, the same sound was building. The Pale Fire engines were waking up, folding the space ahead of them, like invisible hands bending a sheet of paper. Then, in one single moment, 50,000 ships vanished from human space. They did not fly away. They did not accelerate into the distance. They simply disappeared, folded into the gap between one point in space and another, moving faster than anything the galaxy had ever seen. The storm had begun. The signal arrived at Earth on a Tuesday morning. It came through the deep space relay network, bouncing from station to station across 60 light-years before finally reaching the main communication hub in the city of Sejong. A young technician named Minji was the first person to hear it. She had been working the night shift, half asleep in her chair, when her screen lit up with an emergency code she had never seen before in her career. She sat up straight, put on her headset, and played the message. Captain Do-hyun's voice filled her ears. It was broken and rough, filled with static and pain. She listened to every word. Then she played it again, and again. By the third time, her hands were shaking so badly that she could barely press the buttons on her console. She picked up the direct line to Earth's Central Command. Admiral Sujin was already awake. She was the kind of person who slept very little and worked very much. She had been leading Earth's combined space fleet for 12 years, and in that time she had dealt with border disputes, pirate attacks, and one very tense standoff with a species called the Dren over mining rights near Jupiter. But nothing in her career had prepared her for what Minji sent to her screen that morning. Sujin sat in her office and watched the data stream come in. First, the audio message from Do-hyun. Then the sensor data that the colony systems had recorded before going offline. She saw the Velen ships entering the atmosphere. She saw the weapons fire. She saw the thermal readings that showed the entire valley reaching temperatures hot enough to melt steel. And she saw the population counter drop from 2 million to an estimated 40,000 in less than 1 hour. She closed her eyes and pressed her fingers against the desk so hard that her knuckles turned white. For a full minute, she did not move or speak. The officer standing near the door, a man named Byung-ho, watched her carefully. He had worked with Sujin for years. He had never seen her look like this. "Admiral," he said quietly. Sujin opened her eyes. They were dry and hard. "Call an emergency session of the United Earth Council. Every member. No exceptions. I want them in the chamber within 2 hours." Byung-ho nodded and left the room quickly. Sujin stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the city below. People were going about their normal lives, walking to work, drinking coffee, laughing. They did not know yet. They did not know that 2 million of their people had been burned alive on a world most of them had never heard of. 2 hours later, the council chamber was full. The United Earth Council was made up of representatives from every nation and territory on Earth and its colonies. There were over 300 people in the room, and all of them were talking at once. Rumors had already started spreading. Something about a colony. Something about an attack. Nobody had the full picture yet. President Taeho entered the chamber, and the room went quiet. Taeho was a calm man, steady and careful with his words. He had been president for 4 years, and he was known for his patience. He never raised his voice. He never made decisions in anger. He sat down at the head of the long table and looked at Sujin, who stood near a large display screen at the front of the room. "Admiral," Taeho said, "show them." Sujin pressed a button, and the screen behind her came to life. She played Do-hyun's message first. The room was silent as his broken voice echoed off the walls. Then she showed the sensor data, the ships, the fire, the death count. She showed satellite images of the colony before and after. The first image showed green fields, white buildings, and roads connecting small towns. The second image showed black earth and smoke. Nothing else. When it was over, nobody spoke. Sujin looked at the faces around the table. Some people were crying. Some were staring at the screen with empty eyes. A few had their fists clenched so tight that their arms were shaking. Sujin spoke clearly. The Velen Empire carried out this attack without any declaration of war, without any final warning, and without any attempt to evacuate civilians. This was not a military strike. This was an extermination. They killed families. They killed children. They killed people who had no weapons and no way to fight back. She paused and let her words settle over the room like heavy stone. "We have tried diplomacy with the Velens for 15 years. We have attended their councils. We have respected their borders. We have followed every galactic law. And in return, they burned our people alive." The room remained silent. Nobody interrupted. A representative from the European sector, a woman named Hisu, stood up slowly. Her voice was quiet but steady. "What are our options, Admiral?" Sujin looked at her. "We have 3 options. 1. We file a formal complaint with the Galactic Council and wait for them to act. Based on past cases, this could take decades, and the result will likely be a fine or a warning." A few people in the room shook their heads. 2. We accept what happened and increase our defensive presence around existing colonies. More head shaking. 3. We respond with force. The room stirred. People shifted in their seats. Some whispered to each other. The idea of war was something humanity had not faced on a galactic level before. They had small conflicts, small fights, but never a full-scale military response against one of the great empires. President Taeho had been listening, with his hands folded in front of him. Now he stood. Everyone looked at him. He did not shout. He did not slam his fist on the table. He simply stood there, looked at the image of the destroyed colony still glowing on the screen behind Sujin, and spoke 5 words in a voice so calm it was almost frightening. "Wake the fleets, all of them." The room erupted, not in argument, but in agreement. Voices rose together. Representatives who had spent their careers arguing with each other were suddenly nodding at the same time. There was no debate. No vote was needed. The decision had already been made the moment they saw the images. Sujin turned to Byung-ho, who was standing near the door. "Send the order to every shipyard, every dock, every reserve station, full activation. I want every ship we have powered on and ready within 72 hours. Byung-ho saluted and left. Sujin looked at the screen one more time. She thought about the people of New Busan, the families who had gone to sleep, feeling safe. The children who had played in those green fields. The captain who had crawled through the ruins and sent a message into the dark, hoping someone would hear. She had heard. Within the hour, the order reached every corner of human space. Military bases that had been quiet for years suddenly lit up with activity. Retired officers received calls in the middle of the night. Engineers were pulled from civilian projects. Factories that built farming equipment were converted to build weapons. Across the planet and across every human colony, something changed. Something shifted in the air, like the moment before a storm when everything goes still. The galaxy did not know it yet, but humanity had made its decision. Not in rage, not in panic, in something much more dangerous. In cold, quiet, absolute certainty. They were coming, and they were bringing everything they had. The morning sky over New Busan was always a soft orange. It was the kind of sky that made people stop walking and look up for a moment. The colony sat on the edge of a green valley, on a planet called Maro 4, about 60 light-years from Earth. Over 2 million people lived there. They had built farms, schools, hospitals, and small towns that stretched across the valley floor. Children played in the open fields after school. Old men sat outside tea shops and talked about the weather. It was a quiet place, a peaceful place. Nobody expected what came next. Do-hyun was a captain in the colony's small defense unit. He was not a tall man, but he had sharp eyes and a calm voice that made people listen to him. He had served in the Earth military for 10 years before transferring to New Busan 3 years ago. He liked it here. The air was clean, the people were kind. His wife Nari worked at the colony hospital, and their daughter Unji had just turned 7. That morning, Do-hyun was sitting in his office, reviewing supply reports, when the first alarm went off. The sound was different from the regular drill alarm. It was deeper, longer. It did not stop. Do-hyun stood up from his chair and looked out the window. The sky was changing. The soft orange was being eaten away by something dark. Shapes were forming in the clouds, large black shapes that moved slowly and blocked the sunlight, like giant hands covering a lamp. Ships. Hundreds of them. Do-hyun grabbed his communication device and called the main defense tower. A young soldier named Hanbin answered. His voice was shaking. "Captain, we have unknown vessels entering the atmosphere. They are not responding to any of our signals. Their weapon systems are active." Do-hyun felt his stomach drop. New Busan had no real military fleet. They had a few patrol ships and some ground defense weapons, but nothing that could fight a force like this. The colony was a civilian settlement. It was not built for war. "Get every patrol ship in the air," Do-hyun ordered. "Send a distress signal to Earth. Use every channel we have, and start moving people to the underground shelters." Hanbin followed the orders, but they both knew it would not be enough. Earth was 60 light-years away. Even with faster-than-light communication, the signal would take days to arrive, and help would take even longer to come. The Velen ships descended through the clouds in perfect formation. The Velen Empire was one of the oldest powers in the galaxy. They controlled hundreds of star systems, and had a military force that most species feared. Humans had only been part of the galactic community for about 50 years, and in that time, they had kept mostly to themselves. They traded, they explored, and they built colonies on unclaimed worlds. They had never gone to war with anyone. The Velens did not see humans as a threat. They saw them as an inconvenience. Maro 4 sat near a region of space the Velens consider theirs, and the human colony there was something they had complained about for years. Diplomatic talks had gone nowhere. The humans refused to leave. The Velens grew tired of talking, so they came with fire. The first blast hit the center of the colony. The main square, where people gathered every evening, disappeared in a flash of white light. The ground shook so hard that buildings cracked and fell. Do-hyun was thrown off his feet. When he looked up, a cloud of dust and fire rose into the sky where the square used to be. Then the second blast came, and the third, and the fourth. The Velen ships moved across the valley like a storm, burning everything beneath them. Farms turned to black earth. Schools collapsed into rubble. The hospital where Nari worked was hit directly. Do-hyun saw it happen from the hillside where he was trying to organize an evacuation. The building folded in on itself and then exploded outward. He screamed her name, but the sound was lost in the noise of destruction all around him. People were running in every direction. Some carried children. Some carried nothing at all. The patrol ships that Hanbin had sent up were destroyed within minutes. They were small and slow, and the Velen weapons cut through them like paper. The ground defense cannons fired back, but the Velen shields absorbed every shot without any visible damage. Do-hyun ran toward the hospital. He pushed through crowds of panicked people, climbed over broken walls, and crawled through smoke so thick he could barely breathe. When he reached the place where the hospital had stood, there was nothing left. Just a deep hole in the ground, still glowing with heat. He fell to his knees. Around him the colony continued to burn. The Valens were not trying to occupy New Busan. They were trying to erase it. Every building, every road, every field was being destroyed. The underground shelters, which had been built to survive natural disasters, were cracked open by the heavy weapons fire. Thousands of people who had taken shelter there were buried alive. Do-hyun stayed on his knees for a long time. The heat from the fires dried the tears on his face before they could fall. Then he heard a small sound, a beeping. He looked down and saw the emergency distress beacon clipped to his belt. It was still active, still transmitting. He picked it up with shaking hands. He pressed the manual override button, which would boost the signal strength and send a direct recording. Then he spoke. "This is Captain Do-hyun of New Busan Colony, Maro 4. The Velen Empire has attacked us without warning. The colony is destroyed. I repeat, the colony is destroyed. Over 2 million civilians were here. I do not know how many are still alive. We need help. If anyone can hear this, we need help." He lowered the beacon and looked around. The valley that had been full of life just an hour ago was now a field of fire and smoke. The Velen ships were pulling back, rising slowly through the broken sky. Their job was done. Do-hyun stood up. His uniform was torn and covered in dust and blood. His legs were weak, but he forced himself to walk. He found Hanbin under a collapsed wall, alive but badly hurt. He found a group of 40 survivors hiding in a drainage tunnel near the edge of the colony. He found children crying alone in the ruins. But he did not find Nari. He did not find Unji. By nightfall, the fires had died down, and the valley was quiet. The orange sky was gone, replaced by a thick gray haze that blocked out the stars. Do-hyun sat on a rock near the drainage tunnel, holding the distress beacon in his hands. The small light on its side blinked slowly, telling him the message was still being sent. Somewhere out there, 60 light-years away, Earth was about to hear what had happened. Do-hyun did not know what they would do. He did not know if they could do anything. But he held that beacon close to his chest and waited, because waiting was the only thing he had left.